you may have heard about. It's basically the United States response to the global food challenge, which became evident finally, clearly, in 2007 and 2008. And it was our part of the L'Aquila G8 commitment in 2009. President Obama launched this Feed the Future initiative. When Willie and Dave first invited me to come here, they suggested this title about access value chains for smallholders, and my first response was, that's not really my area so much, that I'm more on the research side. And but I think actually I appreciated now in retrospect trying to think about this, because I think the key for us who fund research is to figure out how to connect it to these value chains that are out there. And of course, we have a lot to offer. It's not always recognized, I find, but I think we do have a lot to offer. So I've tried to think about it to approach the issue of value chains as from this research perspective, which I think is actually a good thing, because I've been listening intently to the other speakers today who have a lot more understanding of the complexities of a value chain and what it takes to make one work than I personally do. But we're learning as we go, so I think you'll see some of that in what I say. I also want to just start out by saying that Feed the Future, the bar was set very high for us. The metrics for our investments are reduction in poverty and reduction in child stunting in children under 2, which your chair talked about this morning in his opening remarks. But that's a very high bar for those of us who are trying to fund agricultural research. And I think it's very focusing in terms of trying to really see the innovations through to some sort of benefit at the family level. So what I'll do is I'll say a bit about Feed the Future, then I'll talk about our R&D under Feed the Future, and then I'll look at a few examples, and then I'll look forward a bit. So starting out, Feed the Future, I guess most significantly, is country-led. That means that we are following the lead of our partner countries. There are a number of things here that you can look at, but I would say that the key thing from my perspective is this agriculture-nutrition linkage, which is a real sea change, the idea that nutrition is based on food and not on micronutrient capsules or some other kind of fortification scheme. Gender, very significant, again, linked to nutrition, but also linked very clearly to economic outcomes. Institutions, first time for a long time that we've been able to talk much about institutions at AID in agriculture. And I think, like everything today, this pervasive focus on accountability. So we're all living with that. Those of us on the donor side, and I know all of you live with it day in, day out in terms of metrics and milestones and impact and monitoring and so forth. The biggest difference, again, this one is in blue because that's usually what I talk about, and I didn't know how to make the others turn blue because it's really the first 3 that I'm going to try to tackle here today. But the big difference from my perspective in terms of managing a research program in AID is that we finally, after 20 years almost of LAC, we have bilateral and regional programs that are investing in agricultural development at scale. We had a few bright lights over a long period of relatively low investment, but that really opens up opportunities for all of us because there are people thinking about things like value chains. It's not just the researcher pushing the string with the technology or the policy or the management practice that comes out of our endeavors. There's a community there ready to accept it. So I think this allows us a more integrated approach than we've had for many years in terms of research and development. We are talking about 12% of the resource level going into R&D, so the great majority of it is out in the bilateral and regional programs. There are about 19 focus countries. I'll say a bit more about that later. And the strategy there in those countries is around value chains. So hence the topic that Dave and Willie assigned me, because that's how we have structured our investment strategy. So to give you an idea, I don't think you'll be able to read this, but to give you an idea of this, a very important thing from my perspective, see how much up there is staples. For years, you know, there was that period of, oh, let's just look at high value export opportunities, but now we're back on the idea that staples are important, not exclusively so, but that they are important. Frankly, from my own perspective, staple productivity is actually an important step towards diversification, not a distraction from it. I think they go together. We also have significant efforts on horticulture. This is just Eastern and Southern Africa that you're looking at. And then some you can see on dairy, livestock, and fish. So it's a pretty diverse portfolio that reflects national level analyses and national plans and the countries themselves, their priorities. And then looking here at West Africa, you can see rice, maize, and soy. Millet and sorghum are there. In Mali and in the regional program, our last one over there is our regional mission. And then a little bit less emphasis on vegetables than we saw in Eastern and Southern Africa, some fisheries. And in Asia, where our countries are Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Nepal, it's in Bangladesh and Cambodia, rice, horticulture, and fish. And then in Nepal, rice, maize, horticulture, and pulses. So you can see here, too, that a center like ICRISAT has a number of areas to be plugging into as it looks of how to get its technologies integrated into these kinds of investments, which tend to be more marketing, extension, processing, all kinds of value along the value chain. And those of us in aid funding the research at a place like ICRISAT are very interested and excited to see you seize that opportunity, and we hope we can find ways to be helpful. Now, I want to change gears here because what we've been talking about is national level analysis. But for our global research strategy, you all know that research is all about spilling over across boundaries. It's about returns to investment that are achieved over a very large scale. That we're going to invest in just the kinds of things that a bilateral mission, a USAID mission, is not going to invest in. Longer term, probably around market failures. And so looking at, first of all, we'll start with poverty. I told you our metrics for poverty and malnutrition. So what we see here is prevalence up on the left, and then look at the numbers in South Asia on the right. But if you lower that to 50 cents a day, Africa really pops up on the number side, and South Asia goes down because South Asia, the level of extreme poverty is reducing. In Africa, it's still quite significant. Then we looked at stunting, and again, you can see both stunting and wasting. The concentration, again, Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia really pale in comparison. The rest of the world pales in comparison. It's not that agriculture and food security aren't important in Latin America and elsewhere, but we don't see those levels of human suffering associated with that. And of course, the thing that, then we overlaid this with John Dixon's agroecological zones. You're probably, many of you, familiar with those. And what you find, of course, is that poverty and hunger actually map to the major agricultural ecosystems of the world. And that's where we decided we would focus our efforts, because that's where we think agricultural innovation can really pay off. So what we did was we have the top line goal for us is something called sustainable intensification. Ken Kassman calls it ecological intensification. But the idea here is that that if we're going to be serious about reducing poverty and hunger, we are going to have to find a way to intensify these systems. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it doesn't seem like we have a lot of options if these people are going to stay in agriculture. So we have three overarching overarching research themes that you can see there, and then the 4 geographies which we focus on, the Indo-Gangetic Plains, and this is at the system level. We know our research has broader implications. Sudano-Sahelian systems, mixed maize systems in Eastern and Southern Africa, and Ethiopian highlands. And of course, ICRISAT has important technologies and management practices to offer in all of these areas. Now, that was at the level of the research strategy, but this is what AID has actually decided to do with this. So you can see we've got from a long-term to near-term investment strategy. At the long-term, 3 things: heat and drought-tolerant cereals, which bingo for ICRISAT, of course, with sorghum and millet. Advanced technology solutions for animal and plant diseases, again, important work here. And then legume productivity. Especially because of the nutrition challenge. You know, we know, all of you probably know the story in South Asia that it used to be, what, 3 to 1 legumes to cereal? I mean, cereal to legumes, and now it's about 6 to 1 or something, and legumes have become so much more expensive. Then you can see this middle area that's about the social science, the policy, the nutrition. We're focusing on increased availability and access of quality foods, dairy, poultry, eggs, that sort of thing, animal source foods, horticulture, vegetables, and also food safety, the issue of aflatoxin, which has been mentioned already today. And then finally, the nearer term impact end is what we have called our sustainable intensification of these target systems, the 4 that I mentioned. And then these are the countries where we have the largest bilateral investments. Our work isn't limited to just those 4 countries, but that's where we have a substantial opportunity to try to hook in to those major investments that our missions are making, with the idea of scale. Now, coming back then to the value chain, I know you can't read this, and it's partly here because it shows you how complex people who are really into value chains, I mean, they've really thought it through. And I'm not one of the people who've really gone into this in a huge way, but our missions are doing this. And there are a couple things here that I think are important to take away. One is that it's farm-centered strategy, the household. So it's, in a sense, it's got a livelihoods element because there's there's non-farm income coming in. It's also that it is there's an input value chain where the farmer is the consumer, and then there's the output value chain where the farmer is the base end of it, the producer. And the problem with this, in a sense, is that there's, in many cases, more than one value chain that's being worked on. But our missions didn't necessarily sit down and think about how are all these value chains fitting together. And our argument has been, hey, value chains exist within systems. So just because it's a maize value chain, if you bring in a legume, even though don't have a legume value chain, you may get a double win in terms of the better maize output and profitability, as well as improved nutrition, improved soil fertility, and improved income associated with the legume. So what we're trying to think of through is that, how do you help the farmer integrate? And that's essentially what the sustainable intensification research agenda is about. How does the farmer make those decisions for an optimal profit system? And I guess we're trying to, what we don't want to do is stovepipe our investments. And then thinking about the input systems just for a minute, because there is a lot of attention to that, and we do think that this is a critical piece of the puzzle. That whether it's seeds or fertilizer, this end of this has to be functioning if we're going to get this intensification that we need and want. And so, for example, some of our work is in the area with on the mineral fertilizer value chain, where you start all the way at the chemical companies, and again, coming to the farmer as the customer, and then seeing how that connects to the agricultural product market. So there is a fair amount of emphasis on this. I'm sure IFDC is one of our main partners. And then on the seed side, I think we're still sort of feeling our way forward. We have activities, but it's not simple to see. There's been a lot of good work done on seed systems development in Africa, and it's not simple to see, at least for me anyway, what the next best step is. So taking a look at Ethiopia, for example, we have the input supply work going on here around seeds and fertilizer. Then we have value chain investments, individual value chain investments from the mission across a whole range of things, from wheat, chickpeas, livestock, forages. And then here it is again, this idea that the farmer is the one that's having to juggle these balls and make the decisions. And so we call this the anchor link concept, that the farmer is the integrator, and that's where we think considerable research is needed to just see how those things can be optimized. And so I'll say a little bit about Africa Rising. I think Sig isn't here right now, but she's heavily involved in it. The purpose here is Africa Rising, research and sustainable intensification for the new generation. It's basically providing pathways out of hunger and poverty for smallholders, particularly for women and children, through sustainably intensified farming systems that sufficiently improve food, nutrition, and income security and conserve the resource base. So it's a mouthful, but it basically is looking at how do we seize opportunities for intensification, how do we combine and adapt these options in ways that make them more usable to farmers, and then how do we take them to scale? Not a simple undertaking. And I want to say it's different from the farming systems we all remember from the 1980s. This is really about intensifying. So it's not about characterizing what the farmers are doing only. It's also about how do we get water in there? How do we get fertilizer in there? How do we get science, genetics in there? And so in my sense, bringing our research strategy to the farm level. Here's Jerry Glover. Some of you may know Jerry put this together. You can see as an example, we have for example, those could be value chains from our missions. And you see there's like seeds and breeds and equipment and fertilizer and extension. That's not the main focus here. Neither is the main focus the post-harvest or the milling and packaging or marketing. It's really here in production that the main thrust of our effort is being made on this work. And then just to point out, oh, I see, this is one of these things we have to push more than once. So how can we intensify production? I'm sorry, missing a slide here. There we go, beyond trade-offs. This is important. These are, again, today we've already mentioned some of these things. The above and below ground biomass, how do we juggle the issue of livestock versus soil fertility, NP fertilization, the integration of legumes and fertilizer trees, diversification, very important about spreading risk, integrating livestock and mechanization and conservation agriculture, which is still elusive in many, I think, situations, and improving water productivity to reduce risk and enhance investment. I'll say a little bit more about that later. In South Asia, basically we're looking at the rice wheat system, rice, wheat, cotton, although there is some of that work going on in southern India as well. We're interested in water use efficiency here, in low and no-till, intensified rotation opportunities, reduced labor requirements, mechanization, science. What's the best genetics we have? What's the best information we have on managing the soil resource, water resource? And frankly, I think that this is also essentially, people talk about climate smart agriculture, and I think that's what this is about, really. I think sustainable intensification is essentially climate smart agriculture. In South Asia, just a couple quick examples, one involving the pigeon pea and the rice crop here at ICRISAT, and the sugarcane and pulse intercrop. Again, this idea of getting more legumes into the system and increasing the intensity of the system and increasing both the knowledge inputs in a lot of ways, as well as the science input. And then in Bangladesh, we have the Cereal Systems Initiative for South Asia. This is something we've done in partnership with the Gates Foundation, centers, the international centers, and local partners. And in that country, we have rice, fish, and horticulture as our value chains. And in this case, we've actually turned to the international centers in partnership with NGOs and private business and the government, the national research system, to actually do the scaling. The centers themselves aren't doing the scaling, but they're right in the heart of it. There's this whole concept of hubs that are around technology transfer. So we'll see. It seems to be going well. There's a new hub going to be opening very shortly in Orissa in India. I think Gates Foundation is very focused on Orissa and Bihar, as you probably know. And then just along the value chain, this idea of our productivity research, and then the post-harvest handling research, and finally utilization research. So it's a whole, it's this idea that you're looking forwards and backwards from where you are on the sort of the continuum of the product, where it starts and where it goes to, and that's what we're trying to do in a lot of our different programs now. Social sciences are very important, particularly in making these decisions at the farm level, issues around labor and so forth. And then post-harvest, a lot of issues around harvest practices, labor availability, equipment costs, all kinds of things that go beyond what a global research program would normally look at. And then utilization can be, we've already heard today about some new products. We have examples also of enhanced use because of helping to drive demand by using recipes even that help people know how to use orange flesh sweet potatoes or indigenous vegetables in Africa, this kind of thing. So there's a lot of opportunity to plug in along this chain. And then just a little bit about gender. I think there's been a talk today on this, and I'm not going to dwell on it other than to say that it's a lot about helping women access inputs and markets. And that's participation, for example, in associations. It could even involve assisting purchases of equipment to expand their processing opportunities or their storage opportunities. Mobility constraints, social constraints, there's this whole area around diagnosis of those and then thinking about how to resolve them, and the key point there being that you have to involve men in that decision making, which is kind of interesting. It's maybe not necessarily intuitive in all cases. And it's the biggest thing I think is that it's good for productivity, it's good for incomes. I mean, dealing with gender is a very positive thing to attain all our goals. It's not something we just have to add on. It's actually quite integral. So I think it's exciting. As I say, I think it's one of the real differences that I see in our work in the last few years. I want to give a little shout out to ABRDC here. That they've always been the research and development center. So they have always looked at the whole value chain, and I think there's probably some things we can learn from them. Probably partly because they were dealing with perishable crops in many cases, so the markets are so critical, quality, the perishability, all that sort of thing. But also agronomy and food safety issues around, for example, pesticide residues. There's a whole area of knowledge intensiveness, I think, that goes into vegetable production. And then the marketing and processing. They sort of looked all the way along this. So as an example of that, and I know ICRISAT has actually been one of the leaders here too, is this idea of this, they revolutionized the work on African indigenous vegetables. They did a lot of the breeding in Tanzania at Arusha in partnership with local scientists. And then, but they've gotten seed companies to take these up and they're really helping to drive, promote adoption and utilization. And again, as I mentioned, they do things like get recipes out there and basically raise awareness. And as I said, ICRISAT, I know somebody mentioned this morning, I think early on, that how significant ICRISAT's contribution here in India to the seed industry has been. Just a few examples of how some of our programs are looking down that continuum. This has to do with the technology package in Mali, improved sorghum variety, but it also has to do with some harvesting techniques and this idea of using tarps to keep the grain clean and therefore increase the value of it. And then the storage capacity, where the communities paid for granaries and USAID came in and paid for roofs to keep the grain dry. And this allowed the community to sell months later than it would normally sell and get a much higher price. So this is an example, again, of how the genetics and the post-harvest and the storage can all come together in a way, but it has, it takes a very deliberate understanding of what the opportunities are and what kinds of investments are going to pay off. But they made a premium price selling clean grain in the off season. In peanuts, of course, I think this was already mentioned today by Minister Adesina, the ICRISAT work that greatly reduced the cost of diagnosis of aflatoxin. But in connection with that, another nice example even further down the chain is in this some work that our Peanut Crisp did in the Philippines. It's a scale neutral processing technology that basically uses a roasting process, and after you skin the peanuts, you can actually see the discoloration of the aflatoxin infested peanuts. And so it's been hugely successful in the Philippines, and now in Feed the Future, it's being transferred into Ghana and Uganda. So again, this is a nice opportunity for a program at a U.S. university and a program at an international center to come together and make a difference. Another example was with the larger scale company, but it's kind of interesting. Back in Ethiopia, is with PepsiCo, they have a snack food that's chickpea based. I know we had some, I think, chickpea based snack food at the coffee break today, and they are actively buying chickpeas, and then the mission is investing with 10,000 farmers, and basically it has enabled them to double their yields. And the other neat thing about it is the World Food Program is also buying these chickpeas to provide complementary foods. And in case you don't know what those are weaning foods, which we don't call them weaning foods anymore, because the idea is that you use these foods while you continue breastfeeding. And but it's the kind of thing that hopefully can really take off and allow these farmers who are they're getting a higher yield, they've got an assured market, and it's potentially a market, particularly the snack food one, that could grow. And the other thing that where you get this productivity up, if the crop becomes cheaper, Ethiopians can benefit more generally. And as I said, we are very keen to see legume consumption increase. So I just want to say a little bit about what's happening just recently post L'Aquila in Camp David this year. President Obama and the G8 leaders declared this new partnership with the African Union, this new alliance for food security and nutrition. And it has a number of different areas in it that I don't exactly know what the impact will be, but there's this Grow Africa partnership, which is very much about private sector, both local and international, pledging to invest in agriculture. There's the CADAP national investment plans, which will continue to be a focus, particularly in these countries. I think at the outset it's Tanzania, Ghana, and Ethiopia. And then I think slated to come on next with Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and Mozambique. So potentially some new opportunities for investment in those regions. And I would assume that some of that is going to be value chain oriented, but there's another part of it that's interesting, and that is this technology platform. The CGIAR, FARA, sub-regional organization, and the economic communities will be working together on that to hopefully propel technologies. And then AGRA is going to be working on the scaling seeds and other technologies. So again, I think it's a good time for the research community to be thinking about how it can provide products and plug into these investments at the national or regional level that we see. Finally, I just want to say a little bit back on the last, Dr. Wambugu brought up the issue of water. And I'm very pleased that we're going to be launching a new program very soon. It's competitively bid with the universities, but I hope it will have CG partners as well on small-scale irrigation. I really think that we can't, it's just like the issue with fertilizer. Let's get the nutrients there. Maybe let's get the water there too. Especially at the small scale, there was a British paper that came out just recently that shows that Africa has tremendous groundwater supplies, tremendous, and so somehow, you know, that nut needs to be cracked. And if we don't crack it, then one of these big external investors is going to come in and find a way to crack it somehow, I think. And maybe that's a glib comment. I don't really know that much about that, but I do think that if we're serious about reducing risk, and you don't have to be talking about irrigating the whole farm. You could have 10% of it where you've got water, and it can give you all sorts of resilience benefits. So we can start small, but and I should note the winner of the World Food Prize this year is somebody who's done a lot of work in this area. Of course, ICRISAT, through its work in the Sahel, has done actually a lot of work on the low pressure irrigation. And then also we're going to be starting something in soy that I'm very excited about after years of not being able to work in that. And then the last thing I want to say is that